Designed for Each Other, the Expanded Edition, written by P.O. Dixon, read by Christopher. Chapter 1. For the second time in as many hours, Elizabeth retraced her steps along the path leading from the park right up to the gate of the parsonage house. I absolutely must find Mr. Darcy's letter. Indeed, were it to be discovered by another would mean life-changing consequences for both Elizabeth and the gentleman, to say nothing of the devastating harm to his young sister's reputation. With its bountiful white clouds floating overhead on what otherwise was a perfect day, the picturesque blue sky above presented a stark contrast to the muddled mixture of conflicting emotions warring inside her. Amid the turmoil in her mind from reading Mr. Darcy's letter, folding it, tucking it into her pocket, retrieving it, and rereading it in frequent repetition, Elizabeth misplaced it somewhere along the way. How could I have been so careless with something so delicate as a letter from a gentleman so wholly unconnected to me as Mr. Darcy? A letter revealing his family's most closely guarded secrets, no less. Such had been Elizabeth's silent self-interrogation over and again. For her own part, her rejection of yet another man's proposal of marriage would be discovered, and not just any man, but a man of consequence. Even those closest to her would consider her a laughingstock for refusing the hand of one of the most eligible bachelors in all of England. Many would also argue one of the most desirable, she silently reminded herself. Being the second eldest of 5 daughters living at an estate that was entailed to the male line of the family, she had spent the better part of her 20 years listening to her mother's favourite complaints of the importance of finding a husband. Indeed, a marriage to such a man might have been something wonderful for her family's prospects, and most importantly, her sister Jane's chances for felicity with the gentleman's best friend, a Mr. Charles Bingley. Making matters worse was the opening of the letter, where he vowed there would be no repetition of the sentiment he had espoused the previous evening, which meant that even if she had been tempted by the eloquence of his letter to reconsider her refusal, it was too late. Elizabeth had made an enemy of the one man who could right the wrong to her beloved sister. But was he indeed an enemy, she wondered, for he had also confided in her a great secret about his own sister's brush with scandal, the general knowledge of which might have severe consequences even now. What better evidence that he trusted her? All that will change if I do not manage to secure and destroy the tell-all letter before it falls into the wrong hands. How miserable her life would be should the letter be seen by Mr. Darcy's haughty aunt, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who credited her own generosity of spirits as the reason for Elizabeth's being in Kent. How wretched if her cousin, Mr. Collins, should stumble across the letter. Having been spurned by Elizabeth, he would no doubt relish in the opportunity to expose her before his noble patroness for censure. Either would result in my being forced to return to Longbourn, my father's home, in shame. Such a prospect would contribute greatly to the detriment of her sisters as well. Her elder sister Jane, whom Mr. Darcy had mentioned by name, would surely be ridiculed. Indeed, no one in her family would escape condemnation, she considered, as a most disparaging account of their behaviour in Hertfordshire was cited. The situation of your mother's family, though objectionable, was nothing in comparison to that total want of propriety so frequently, so almost uniformly betrayed by herself, by your 3 younger sisters, and occasionally even by your father. So much as she was concerned about how the contents of the letter reflected on her family, the more serious potential harm would befall his very own sister. Mr. Darcy had explained at length how he had arrived in Ramsgate just in time to prevent her from eloping with his worst enemy, George Wickham. All this he had disclosed with the expectation of secrecy, Elizabeth considered in reflection, of his heart-wrenching written words. I must now mention a circumstance which I would wish to forget myself, and which no obligation less than the present should induce me to unfold to any human being. Having said thus much, I feel no doubt of your secrecy. My sister, who is more than 10 years my junior, was left to the guardianship of my mother's nephew, Colonel Fitzwilliam, and myself. About a year ago she was taken from school, and an establishment formed for her in London. Last summer she went with the lady who presided over it to Ramsgate, and thither also went Mr. Wickham, undoubtedly by design, for there proved to have been a prior acquaintance between him and Mrs. Young, in whose character we were most unhappily deceived. Elizabeth's silent recollection of Mr. Darcy's letter was soon interrupted by the sound of someone's voice. "Pardon me, madam, you seem to be in search of something. May I offer you my help?" Startled by her unexpected companion, Elizabeth spun around on her heel. Her eyes met those of a stranger's, which was some consolation, for it spared her the embarrassment of confiding what she was searching for. "No!" Elizabeth exclaimed with energy. Remembering her manners, she said, "That is to say, I should hate to inconvenience you." "It is no bother," replied the stranger, a stout woman on the best side of 30 with a pleasant countenance. Her manner of dress suggested she might be a servant from Rosings Park. "I assure you I am more than happy to help you find whatever it is that you are looking for. Perhaps you might describe it." Despite being surprised to meet anyone other than Colonel Fitzwilliam or Mr. Darcy in that particular lane, if she were to encounter anyone at that precise moment, far better it was a servant. She had lost count of the number of times she had accidentally met the latter of Lady Catherine de Bourgh's aforementioned nephews, only to have him turn and take the empty space by her side and proceed to accompany her on what was meant to be a solitary ramble. How odd it always struck her that he would even wish for her company. She always supposed he did not like her, and as she had never consciously done anything to garner his good opinion, his opinion of her was of little consequence. Still, she could not help but search her brain trying to remember the other occasions of their being alone, just the two of them since his arrival in Kent. He certainly made a point of visiting me at the parsonage house during those times when the Collinses were away. For the first time since their argument at the parsonage house, the motives behind the haughty gentleman's confounding behaviour dawned on her. How could I have been so blind as to be wholly unaware that Mr. Darcy was courting me? Remembering the kind stranger awaiting a reply to her offer of assistance, Elizabeth said, "Actually, it was nothing at all. At least, nothing of consequence. No doubt it will turn up sooner or later." With that, Elizabeth smiled a little. "Good day," she said, effectively sending the older woman on her way, now free to dwell on the contents of Mr. Darcy's missing letter. She recalled in great detail what Mr. Darcy had written about the means Mr. Wickham had employed to deceive young Miss Darcy. By Mrs. Young's connivance and aid, Wickham so far recommended himself to Georgiana, whose affectionate heart retained a strong impression of his kindness to her as a child, that she was persuaded to believe herself in love. Thus she consented to an elopement. She was then but 15, which must be her excuse, and after stating her imprudence, I am happy to add that I owed the knowledge of it to herself. I joined them unexpectedly a day or two before the intended elopement, and then Georgiana, unable to support the idea of grieving and offending a brother whom she looked up to almost as a father, acknowledged the whole to me. This must surely attest to the strength of Miss Darcy's esteem for her older brother that she would do so. Elizabeth could not help but reflect. She had heard so much about the young woman from those who knew her best. By all accounts she was very accomplished, especially as evidenced by her excellence on the pianoforte. Some thought of George Wickham's portrayal of Miss Darcy could not help but intrude. He accused her of being haughty and above her company. How could I possibly have been so deceived by another? Am I so shallow that I mistook his physical beauty for personal integrity? Her silent question summoned her once again to what she could recall of Mr. Darcy's letter. Mr. Wickham's chief object was unquestionably my sister's fortune, which is £30,000, but I cannot help supposing that the hope of revenging himself on me was a strong inducement. His revenge would have been complete indeed, consumed with such dreadful thoughts conjured up by the notion of what might have happened to young Miss Darcy, had it not been for the timely intervention of a devoted older brother. Elizabeth resolved once again to retrace her steps. I simply must find Mr. Darcy's letter. Chapter 2. Charlotte's leisurely morning escape, allowing her to avoid her husband's company, came to an end the moment she espied a letter on the side of the lane. She threw a quick glance over her shoulder, and seeing no one else about, she retrieved it. The opening salutation gave a great pause. Eliza must have dropped this, but it does not look like Jane's penmanship. She frowned. I would say it is from her father, but by Eliza's own account, Mr. Bennet never writes such long letters. As tempting as it was to read the lengthy missive, doing so would have been the means of a most egregious violation of her intimate friend's privacy. A hasty perusal of the last page drew her eyes to the letter's closing, a somewhat charitable one at that. I will only add, God bless you. F.D. Utterly astounded, Charlotte's heart slammed against her chest. She always knew Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy admired her friend a great deal. Realizing that the relationship between the two of them had progressed in such a manner that allowed for the exchange of written correspondence surprised her. Charlotte, more than anyone, knew Elizabeth was rather free-spirited, but such a breach of etiquette was wholly uncharacteristic. That is to say nothing of Mr. Darcy himself. What might tempt him to flaunt proper decorum in such a manner as this? Unless, Charlotte silently speculated. Folding the letter and tucking it into her pocket, she sped her pace and returned to the parsonage. She planned to surrender the letter to its rightful owner. Her busy mind was full of suppositions and unanswered questions, but she did not intend to pry into Elizabeth's private affairs. On the other hand, she certainly was not opposed to hearing whatever explanation Elizabeth might provide. After all, Charlotte had been the one to suggest early on that Mr. Darcy was in love with Elizabeth. All the clues were there for anyone who wished to see. There was Mr. Darcy's peculiar interest in her friend when they were all together at her father's home, Lucas Lodge, in Hertfordshire. Also there was the honour he had bestowed on her by singling her out for a dance during the Netherfield ball, as well as the manner in which he could often be observed looking at Elizabeth when he supposed no one noticed him doing so. True enough, Mr. Darcy had committed a most egregious error by insulting her friend at the onset of their acquaintance last autumn. By an account from none other than Elizabeth herself, the gentleman had bruised her ego quite severely when he complained to his friend, Mr. Charles Bingley, that she was tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt him. I'm confident he would not have spoken so harshly if he had even the vaguest hint that his words would be so hurtful if overheard. While Mr. Darcy is a proud man, I never supposed he was mean-spirited. Charlotte recalled her exact words to her friend when Mr. Darcy called on the parsonage house not very long ago. I may thank you, Eliza, for this piece of civility. Mr. Darcy would never have come so soon to wait upon me. While Elizabeth was not eager to acknowledge, and much less appreciate such a compliment, Charlotte was grateful enough for herself and for her friend, and what it might mean for the latter's prospects for felicity. Finally, Mr. Darcy's telling reaction and prompt departure from Rosings yesterday upon learning of Eliza's ill health did not escape my notice. Surely others in our party noticed it too. Charlotte congratulated herself for being right the entire time. With such a confirmation as this, her friend could not possibly deny it. I know precisely how to act, Charlotte said softly. With that in mind, her spirits rose with every step she took. What a lucky woman my friend is to have garnered the ardent affections of a man like Mr. Darcy. Surely Mrs. Bennet will be beside herself with joy, as will all the Bennets, no doubt. Perchance, the matriarch of Longbourn will be thanking me for marrying Mr. Collins as opposed to loathing my very existence, and that will be something indeed. In inviting my friend to visit me this spring, did I not provide the means of uniting her with Mr. Darcy? Elizabeth was standing in front of the fireplace staring intently into the flames when Charlotte entered the parlour. Even the soft creak of the door opening and closing, as well as Charlotte's tenuous footsteps to where her friend stood, went unheard. Charlotte cleared her throat, startling Elizabeth. Her arms wrapped around herself, Elizabeth turned. "I found this on my way home," said Charlotte, handing over the folded letter. Elizabeth felt a rush of relief spread all over her body. "I have been looking everywhere for this," she cried, accepting the proffered missive. Elizabeth fancied herself a somewhat private person. As close as she was to her elder sister Jane, she had not intended to tell her about Mr. Darcy's proposal. She certainly did not mean to confide her secret to Charlotte, despite the lifelong intimacy between the two of them. The thought that her friend was now thoroughly acquainted with the letter's contents gave her pause. "What I meant to say is thank you. I should hate to think what might have happened had this missive fallen into the wrong hands," Charlotte said. "No doubt. And let me assure you that I did not read any more than was necessary to discover the identity of the writer, as well as the intended recipient, but I hope I do not assume too much in asking you to allow me to be the first to wish you joy." Elizabeth's relief in knowing she was not obliged to divulge any more than was necessary to satisfy her friend's curiosity was palpable. But dispelling Charlotte's mistaken impression about an alliance with Mr. Darcy was essential. "Oh, Charlotte," she began, "things are not at all as they appear. Trust me when I say I am the last person in the world to whom you ought to wish joy. On the contrary, you might very well subject me to a severe rebuke." "What do you mean?" "You will recall my telling you, upon his arrival in Kent, that Mr. Darcy was in your power. How can I help but think this letter is a confirmation of my sentiments? Of course Charlotte would think as she does. How many times has she tried to persuade me that Mr. Darcy held me in esteem, that he admired me? His eloquently chosen words uttered the night before in that very room echoed in her mind. "You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you." If only his avowal had not been preceded by his telling me how he had struggled in vain, and of his feelings which he could no longer repress. Elizabeth turned back to the fireplace, tossed the letter into the burning flames, and watched as Mr. Darcy's words burned into charred nothingness. Gone forever was the physical evidence of their transgressions, his in having written the letter, and hers in having accepted it. Having committed its contents to memory, Elizabeth only wished it were so simple to erase the entire ordeal from her mind. By now she blamed herself just as much, if not more, than she blamed Mr. Darcy for the disastrous evening. "What are you doing?" Charlotte asked, her expression clouded with confusion. "Charlotte, it is just as well that you did not read the letter, for the words contained therein might have been the means of ruining your good opinion of me, perhaps forever." "Eliza," her voice pained, she cried, "I have been such an unmitigated fool." Charlotte reached out her hand to her friend. "You, a fool? Why on earth would you say such a thing?" "What I am about to tell you is something I ought not to be discussing with anyone, but I fear it is far too much for me to keep to myself." Charlotte placed her hand on Elizabeth's arm. "You know you can rely on my discretion." "Indeed. You have always kept my confidences in the past, but this is not so much my secret. Not entirely. It has to do with a young lady whose acquaintance neither of us has had the privilege of making, and Mr. Wickham." She shrugged a little. "Suffice it to say, he is not the man whom I long believed him to be. Mr. Darcy, on the other hand, oh dearest Charlotte, I fear I have misjudged him severely. You know I have long suspected that he held you in the highest esteem. Indeed, and I even recall how you cautioned me not to let my good opinion of Mr. Wickham cloud my opinion of Mr. Darcy, stating that the latter was 10 times the worth of the former. It is true, but doing so does not make you a fool. Is there something else you wish to share about your being in possession of a letter from Mr. Darcy? Just as I was mistaken in my judgment of Mr. Darcy's character, I was also mistaken in my interpretation of his feelings for me. I always thought he held me in so little esteem as I held him, despite your arguments to the contrary. What are you saying? Mr. Darcy told me that he loves me, most ardently. Oh, Charlotte, he offered me his hand in marriage." A broad smile threatened to overtake Charlotte's face. Elizabeth hastened to add, "However, I refused his offer, and in no uncertain terms. I went so far as to tell him that he is the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed on to marry." "But why would you do such a thing?" Charlotte asked, incredulity ringing in her voice. "You know very well that I could never marry a man whom I did not admire and respect, dare I say, love. And at the time of Mr. Darcy's proposal I was quite persuaded that I loathed him." The irony of her confession to her friend was not lost on Elizabeth. Having refused her cousin Mr. Collins's hand in marriage a few months earlier, the same man who went on to win Charlotte's hand. "That is a powerful sentiment indeed. I always knew Mr. Darcy was not your favourite person in the world, but I always attributed your feelings to the rude remark he made at the beginning of your acquaintance that you were not handsome enough to tempt him, even though all evidence spoke to the contrary. That was indeed the basis for my initial ill feelings toward him, coupled with Mr. Wickham's accusations. But that was nothing in comparison to what I later learned about the gentleman from none other than his own relation." "Are you referring to Lady Catherine? If you do not mind my asking, what did she say?" "I am afraid it was not Lady Catherine who further poisoned my mind against Mr. Darcy. No, it was his cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam. What could have been his purpose? Surely he could see how much Mr. Darcy admired you whenever the three of you were in company. You must not blame the Colonel for failing to discern his cousin's sentiments. Even I was caught utterly unaware by his ardent avowal of love, and I was the recipient. Saying that, the Colonel was attempting to portray his cousin in an admirable light by boasting of what a loyal friend he is, especially toward Mr. Bingley." "Mr. Bingley?" "Indeed! Oh, Charlotte, I always had a vague suspicion that Mr. Darcy had a hand in separating his friend and my sister Jane from each other. The Colonel's account of Mr. Darcy's behaviour confirmed it. So, you see, I had no choice but to refuse Mr. Darcy's offer of marriage. How could I possibly be expected to accept the man who had been the means of causing my sister such pain and subjecting her to derision of the cruellest kind? Elizabeth folded one arm over the other. At least that was my reasoning at the time. Now I hardly know what to think or how to feel. I take it that Mr. Darcy's letter has something to do with your changed sentiments. Indeed, it has everything to do with it. How so? She shrugged a little. Merely by explaining his motives, which were indeed warranted for someone who does not know Jane so well as I do, and in a manner that even I am hard-pressed to deny. I truly do believe that he was not behaving out of malice, but rather in service to his friend. In truth, Elizabeth had behaved similarly towards Charlotte, in a manner of speaking. Had it been in her power, she would have prevented her intimate friend from marrying that odious Mr. Collins, owing to the man's foolish propensities. Only Charlotte was not so malleable as Bingley. I might have been just as guilty as Mr. Darcy, and yet I held him in contempt. What manner of person does that make me? Chapter 3. After hearing her friend Elizabeth account for the reason behind Mr. Darcy's letter, Charlotte could not possibly sit by idly and do nothing, especially if it were in her power to bring about a more favourable resolution of her friend's predicament. I know my friend too well to suspect that she will do anything to alter her current course. Eliza has always been rather obstinate and headstrong, and I suspect Mr. Darcy can be equally so. Thus, Charlotte quickly resolved to take matters into her own hands. I only hope I'm not too late. With Mr. Darcy and his cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam, having delayed their departure from Kent several times already, she now surmised the reason had to do with the former's desire to spend more time in the same part of the country as her friend. With no such reason to remain, the gentleman might very well leave Kent at any moment. What a stroke of luck it was for Charlotte when Mr. Darcy and the Colonel called on the parsonage the very next day. Learning that they did indeed plan to leave, and that they were merely calling to say goodbye, she decided to put her scheme of throwing Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy in each other's path as too late. She usually did not rely upon her husband's company, but that particular morning his lingering presence was absolutely necessary. Mr. William Collins was a tall, heavy-looking young man of 25, whose air was grave and stately and his manners very formal. Who better than the pretentious gentleman to wax ad nauseam poetically, without saying hardly anything at all? The mantel clock ticked, Mr. Collins talked, and, nodding their heads at all the right times, the others bided their time. Observing Mr. Darcy's manner, Charlotte was certain he entertained the hope of seeing Elizabeth that morning. Every sound outside the parlour door was met with a look of disappointment on the gentleman's face upon discovering that it was not her friend joining their party. The Colonel was eager to see Elizabeth as well, albeit for different reasons. Charlotte could see that he enjoyed being in Elizabeth's company, and for a time she supposed her friend might be in some danger from the highly agreeable man. He had a way of making everyone around him feel as though he and they were acquaintances of long duration. A stranger might find it hard to believe the blood running through his veins was the same as the noble blood which ran through Lady Catherine de Bourgh's. For Mr. Collins's part, he was exceedingly grateful for the opportunity to pay those parting civilities, which he considered indispensably necessary to his noble patroness's 2 favourite nephews. "I know not," said he to his esteemed guests, "whether Mrs. Collins has yet expressed her appreciation for your kindness in visiting us so regularly as both of you did. Indeed, the favour of your company has been much felt, I assure you. I am certain my fair cousin Miss Elizabeth would express a similar sentiment if she were here." Looking to his wife for confirmation, he said, "Do you not agree, Mrs. Collins?" Her mind outside those walls in contemplation of where her friend might be, she had not heard a word her husband said. She rarely listened to his ramblings, which so often were built on mountains of ridiculousness. Still, she was not insensitive to the benefit of her husband's particular attributes at such a time as this. The longer he delayed the guests' leave-taking, the better the chances that Elizabeth would return and find them sitting there, waiting for her. "Pardon me, Mr. Collins. I was just telling Mr. Darcy and Colonel Fitzwilliam that my dear cousin Miss Elizabeth would be just as pleased with the opportunity to pay parting civilities to the 2 of them as both you and I are, with all the certainty that you would agree." Charlotte nodded. "I do agree indeed." Pleased with his wife's assertion, Mr. Collins said, "I know how little there is to tempt anyone to our humble abode. Our plain manner of living, our small rooms and few domestics, and the little we see of the world must make Hunsford extremely dull to gentlemen of sense and education, and knowledge of the world such as yourselves. I am certain you both have travelled far and wide, and have seen places that my wife and I can only dream about, although I suppose our station in life will not always be so ordinary and mundane as it is." Mr. Darcy tugged at his collar with this pronouncement, which Collins likely read as ungratefulness on his own part. Not insensitive to Mr. Darcy as well as the Colonel's admiration for their aunt, Mr. Collins cried, "That is not to say that I do not appreciate Lady Catherine de Bourgh's unparalleled benevolence in having granted me the living here in Hunsford, and done all she can to improve on the parsonage house herself, doing an extraordinary job of it, if I might say so myself. But as you may or may not know, I am the heir to Longbourn estate in Hertfordshire, which means I too shall be able to boast of being among the landed gentry." Charlotte felt it absolutely necessary to speak up before her husband began pontificating on Longbourn's current master's future demise. "Mr. Collins, I am rather certain our guests are aware that you in no way intended to minimise Lady Catherine's benevolence on our behalf." Having sat patiently in the same attitude since arriving, the Colonel stood. "If you all would pardon me, I think I should like to walk out to look for Miss Elizabeth in the park." Charlotte's pulse quickened. It was now or never if her scheme stood a chance of success. "My dear Mr. Collins," she said, "did you not say that you wanted to show the Colonel the book you came across yesterday? I posit that now is a perfect time. Who is to say when such an opportunity might present itself again?" She looked at Mr. Darcy. "Sir, may I prevail on you to go in search of my dear friend in the Colonel's stead? I know with certainty that she would be sorry to have missed seeing you and your cousin this morning." If Mr. Darcy suspected that Mrs. Collins was insinuating herself into the role of matchmaker, he gave no clue of his suspicions. Each of the men agreed to the arrangement in their turns, and moments later Charlotte was all alone in the parlour, congratulating herself on carrying out her scheme with so little trouble to herself. She whispered a little prayer that any stubbornness her friend might be clinging to would be overruled by her sensibilities, and all would unfold just as she envisioned everything ought to turn out. My friend deserves such a man as Mr. Darcy. Chapter 4. Darcy did not walk very far before seeing Elizabeth in the lane. Having come across her in that exact spot just the day before struck him as ironic. It haunted him still the things he did and did not convey in the letter he handed to her, and not knowing how any of it had affected her. He also had a sense that she might have confided in her friend Mrs. Collins some of the things he had said. None of that matters now. He approached her directly and bowed slightly. "Pardon me, Miss Elizabeth." "Mr. Darcy," Elizabeth replied, curtsying. "My cousin and I called at the parsonage with the intention of saying goodbye before taking our leave of Kent." "You are leaving today?" Elizabeth asked. Darcy detected a hint of remorse in her voice, which encouraged a bit of hope deep inside him that perhaps his letter had melted some of the resentment that was so evident in her the day before. He nodded. "The Colonel insisted we pay the Collinses the courtesy, and despite all that has unfolded between us, I would have been wholly remiss had I failed to bid you a proper goodbye." "Sir, truth be told, I'm glad you did not leave without saying goodbye. You see, I feel I owe you an apology, and I should hate to be so indebted for the rest of my days. Your letter? I know giving it to you violated the bounds of decorum. However, I desperately wanted to explain things from my vantage point. I could think of no other way after the manner of our parting the evening before. I suppose we both needed time to allow cooler heads to prevail." Elizabeth shifted her posture a bit. "Sir," she began, "surely you must think I am quite naive, dare I say gullible, to have believed Mr. Wickham's easy lies, and yet you placed an inordinate degree of trust in me in exposing the gentleman's true character." "Miss Elizabeth, when I said I loved you, I meant every word of it," he said impulsively. Remembering himself, he said, "Pray, forgive me for speaking on a subject that I promised never to mention again." "I wish you would not say that." His voice sprinkled with a hint of optimism. Mr. Darcy asked, "Why not?" "Dare I hope your feelings have changed?" "It is safe to say that your letter has given me much to consider," she replied tentatively. "Were I in possession of the facts as conveyed in your letter, I surely would not have spoken so harshly, especially as regards my ill-advised defence of Mr. Wickham." "And what of the matter of my role in separating your sister and my friend Bingley?" "I don't know that I would ever truly regret expressing my disapproval of your officiousness, but I am willing to confess that I now have a better understanding of your motives. My good intentions toward my friend aside, the fact remains that your sister was wounded, and for that I am truly sorry. Would that I could make amends." "Oh, but you can, sir," Elizabeth exclaimed with energy. That is to say, I believe it is fully within your power to set things right." Darcy arched his brow, which served as enough encouragement for Elizabeth to continue. "Mr. Bingley values your opinion, even more than his own, I suspect. If you would tell him that you were mistaken, I am certain he would listen." Darcy said nothing, but rather pursed his lips. At length he remarked, "I think my abrupt change in stance might be more plausible, were I to see the two of them together once again, and then announce my change in attitude. Besides, my friend is not nearly so constant as you give him credit for being." "Are you suggesting that his feelings for my sister may have changed in the span of 4 or 5 months? I know my friend well enough to know that it is not outside the realm of possibility, especially when you consider that their acquaintance in Hertfordshire was of an even shorter duration." Elizabeth sighed. "I do not like to concede your point, but I must confess there is a chance. You know your friend far better than I do, after all. Miss Elizabeth, I propose we arrange to have your sister and my friend meet again." "How do you advise bringing about such a meeting?" Darcy could not help thinking that should events unfold between his friend Bingley and Miss Bennet, as Elizabeth hoped they would, it would mean many opportunities for Elizabeth and him to be in company. On the other hand, he was very mindful of the fact that Bingley may have indeed met and fallen in love with another angel in the week since he had last seen him. Bingley is nothing if not inconstant. Preferring not to stake his own future to his friend's capricious character, Darcy searched his mind for a solution that would serve his purposes as well as satisfy Elizabeth's desire for a reunion between Bingley and her sister. What if said reunion were to take place in Kent? It meant delaying his trip for one and persuading Bingley to come to Kent. It also meant Elizabeth would have to persuade her sister to come to Hunsford. Darcy was certain that Mrs. Collins would be agreeable to the scheme, especially given the none too subtle measures she had employed in persuading him to seek out Elizabeth before departing from Kent. He was rather confident his aunt could have no objection to the scheme, for nothing would please her more than to have added time to cajole Darcy into doing his so-called duty towards the family by asking Anne for her hand in marriage, as though such a thing would ever happen. As for the Colonel, Darcy suspected he was in no particular hurry to return to town. Should duty call, he was certainly at liberty to avail himself to either Darcy's largesse or that of Lady Catherine and be on his way. Darcy secretly congratulated himself on having concocted what he imagined was the perfect scheme. He only needed to present it to Elizabeth. Intending to do just that, he said, "Do you suppose your sister can be prevailed upon to come to Kent?" "Are you so opposed to bringing your friend to Cheapside, Mr. Darcy?" "No, not at all. I am simply proposing that your sister comes here, and likewise, I shall invite Bingley. He has always expressed an interest in visiting this part of the country, with me, and equally important, apart from his sisters. I shall send an express inviting him to do so this very day." "It sounds like a lovely scheme indeed. Of course, it will take more time for me to arrange all the particulars in bringing Jane here. I do not dare claim the ability to arrange things according to my own purposes so easily as you. I am more than happy to do everything in my power to hasten things along. That is to say, should you wish it, Miss Elizabeth, you can have no doubt as to my own interest in this matter. Sir, if you are hoping that a reconciliation between my sister and Mr. Bingley is a sure step toward the resolution of our own dilemma, I'm afraid I cannot make any promises. As you know, disguise of any sort is my abhorrence, and therefore I will be completely honest with you. It is indeed my greatest wish that this occasion will afford ample time for you and me to begin anew with a far better understanding of where we stand in each other's esteem, and possibly effect a far happier outcome than either of us might have expected after the events that unfolded between us when we were last together." Thus obliged, Darcy wrote to his friend later that same day as follows: "My dear Bingley, I have long owed you a letter since my arrival and continued presence in this part of the country, and I write now with the sincere hope of setting right what I fear has been misjudged. In my efforts to act in what I believed to be your best interest last autumn, I may have erred in ways that were not mine to determine, and it is this that compels me to pursue this course. I hope that time has brought you clarity, especially in matters of the heart, and that the months apart have allowed you to focus on the pursuits that bring you true satisfaction. Miss Elizabeth Bennet has been a guest of Mrs. Charlotte Collins, née Lucas, for the duration of my time here, a situation which has brought me a measure of clarity of my own. Miss Bennet is soon to join the Hunsford party, I state this without expectation, only so that you may know it. If you should wish to see this part of the country, I assure you, it would be no inconvenience on anyone's part were you to join me as a fellow guest here at Rosings Park. Your presence would be most welcome, though I make the invitation with no presumption. If it is your inclination to come, send word, and I shall inform Lady Catherine de Bourgh of your imminent arrival. As one of my closest friends, I'm sure her ladyship will offer no opposition too contentious to bear. Darcy went on to write about matters of inconsequential concern, along with the strongest hint that his invitation to Bingley in no way extended to his friend's family, Mr. and Mrs. Hurst and Miss Caroline Bingley, especially considering their impatience with the aforementioned parties, with whom they also claim acquaintance. Assured that his friend would then know precisely how to act, he concluded the missive as follows: Your friend F. Darcy. Chapter 5. Colonel Fitzwilliam's curiosity about his cousin's last-minute change in plans would not be repressed. He knew better than anyone how Darcy enjoyed arranging things for his own convenience, but this was getting to be a bit too much. This was not the first time his cousin had delayed the return trip to town with little more than a shrug of his shoulder. Their bags were packed in preparation for their return to London, for heaven's sake. Given the peculiar nature of the latest delay, the Colonel wanted answers. Darcy, if it is not too much to ask, pray what on earth is the reason for your sudden change of heart? Mind you, I will not allow my question to be so easily dismissed as on the prior occasions. By Darcy's expression, the Colonel could tell his cousin did not like to be questioned. Nevertheless, Fitzwilliam continued, I cannot help thinking your decision to remain even longer has to do with Miss Elizabeth Bennet. You know, cousin, you are under no obligation to remain here. It is not as though Lady Catherine is holding you as a hostage. Your attempt at deflection will not work. Is there something more to your connection to Miss Elizabeth Bennet, other than your being old acquaintances from your time in Hertfordshire last autumn? Darcy folded one arm over the other. You take an eager interest in my affairs. It has been one of my favourite diversions for the past couple of decades, has it not? The younger man scoffed. As it pertains to Miss Elizabeth, I regrettably wish that were not the case. Regrettably? Indeed, because you took it upon yourself to inform her of my part in saving my friend Bingley from a most disadvantageous alliance. Her opinion of me is poisoned to such a violent extent that it may never truly recover. The Colonel shrugged. I only told Miss Elizabeth about that business with Charles Bingley as a means of vouching for your excellent character. Why do you assume she mistook my intentions? I imagine it is because the young woman from whom I saved my friend was none other than her dearest sister, Miss Jane Bennet. No, the Colonel stated with a look of astonishment. Darcy swept his fingers through his dark hair. How you could not have surmised the connection on your own is beyond comprehension. I take umbrage with your attitude, Darcy, especially as my intention was to bolster Miss Elizabeth's opinion of you. What is done is done. Besides, I suspect I owe you in an odd sort of way. I truly had no idea that Miss Elizabeth's sister had suffered Bingley's leave-taking so heart-wrenchingly as she did. It pains me to know that I had a part in that, regardless of my good intentions toward my friend. Anything I can do to make amends is well worth the effort. What he did not say was, as a painful result of his cousin's loquacious nature, he had also gotten a glimpse of the depths of Elizabeth's disdain for him. It would be quite some time before he no longer felt the sting of her words. From the very beginning, from the first moment, I may almost say, of my acquaintance with you, your manners, impressing me with the fullest belief of your arrogance, your conceit, and your selfish disdain of the feelings of others, were such as to form the groundwork of disapprobation, on which succeeding events have built so immovable a dislike. And I had not known you a month before. I felt that you were the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed on to marry. Stinging words indeed. He had George Wickham, his former friend and current nemesis, to thank for that. Wickham, as well as myself, if I am to be completely honest. Whatever the cause, I shall not rest until I have garnered her good opinion, and even that will not be enough. I love her, I want her, I need her, and I will do all in my power to make her mine. So, what, pray tell, do you plan to do to remedy the situation if it is not asking too much? I have invited Bingley to Kent for a visit. Hence your purpose in delaying your return to town. Unless I'm mistaken, Miss Elizabeth's elder sister is also in town. How does inviting Bingley to Kent benefit her? There has been a change of plans. Miss Bennet will also be visiting this part of the country. It is all arranged. She will be Mrs. Collins's guest. But I do not understand. Your purpose in separating the two of them in the first place was because you did not think that Miss Bennet cared as much for your young friend as he cared for her. That and the fact that you believed her family, more specifically Miss Elizabeth's family, was uncouth. What has happened to change your mind? Miss Elizabeth changed my mind. How did she do that? We had a very long talk. I addressed my concerns as regarded her sister's tepid attachment to Bingley, and she assured me that I was mistaken. Elizabeth had also said her sister rarely showed her true feelings to anyone, which in hindsight struck him as particularly ironic. Had he not failed to show his own true feelings to Elizabeth? She seemed utterly unaware of the depths of my love for her. Do you mean to tell me that the great Mr. Darcy of Pemberley openly confessed making a mistake to a woman? The Colonel inquired. I have always been willing to admit my mistakes when indeed I have made one. Bingley is of an age where he is always making new acquaintances. What is more, he is always falling in love with one angel or another. As I have said before, I had concerns that his attachment to Miss Bennet was stronger than hers was to him. My mistake was in thinking she had no feelings for him, that she might have been tempted by his fortune and her mother's boasting aloud to whoever would listen, that Miss Bennet and Bingley were soon to be married. And now you have persuaded yourself that you were wrong about Miss Bennet's affection for your young friend Bingley. I have come to consider that I should not have interfered in the love affairs of others. Had I only come to this realization sooner, Darcy thought, remembering his speech to Elizabeth at the parsonage house. I have no wish of denying that I did everything in my power to separate my friend from your sister, or that I rejoice in my success. Towards him I have been kinder than towards myself. He shuddered in recollection of his poorly chosen words. A part of him supposed he would never forgive himself for being the cause of Miss Bennet's pain, and thereby Elizabeth's. Why then do I suppose Elizabeth's sentiments would be so much different than my own? Having met Miss Elizabeth, I would have to say that if she and her sister are at all alike, Charles Bingley must be a fool to have allowed himself to be so easily persuaded to walk away from her. The Colonel took a sip of his drink. I for one can hardly wait to meet the young woman. So long as you remember the purpose of her coming, I shall have no cause to repine. What is that supposed to mean, pray tell? I know you, cousin. Most of all, I know how much you enjoy a pretty face. Rest assured, Darcy, Miss Bennet is perfectly safe from me. That is assuming she wishes to be. I suppose we will have to wait and see. Thank you for listening to Designed for Each Other, the Expanded Edition, Chapters 1 through 5. If you have enjoyed this story thus far, and I hope you have, you will not want to miss what happens next. Subscribe to this channel today and be among the first to be notified when Designed for Each Other, the Expanded Edition, the complete audiobook, is available for your listening pleasure. Your likes, subscribes, comments, and shares help this channel grow.